Ferguson's mayor is launching a new effort to recruit minorities to the police department, which brings us to question number 3. Will the Ferguson uproar prompt police departments to reevaluate, possibly make significant changes to their procedures? Well, joining me now, defense attorney Brian Claypool and former Los Angeles police officer David Klinger, author of Into the Kill Zone. So, Brian, let's talk here first. Days ago, New York police announced a move to clean up officers' language, right? No more cursing, profanity for officers who are on patrol. And you say that a more courteous tone from Officer Wilson might have changed things in Ferguson. How so?
Well, Suzanne, de-escalating a situation or diffusing a situation should be of paramount concern versus escalating a situation. And I think in the Michael Brown shooting case, if Officer Wilson would have simply pulled up and said, "Hey guys, let's talk. Where have you been? Why are you walking in the middle of the street?" Start with that tone versus if you take your car and you try to block these young men from walking, and then Officer Wilson's actually pinned inside the car, that automatically escalates the situation. It's no different, Suzanne, than you and I having a conversation where if you're in a relationship, when you start with a tone that is a little harsher, it puts the other person on the defensive. And in this context, it can escalate and lead to a tragic shooting like this.
Well put. David, let's talk about this. Officer Wilson washed the blood off his own hands before anyone even photographed them. Can we trust that Ferguson police now are going to change their own procedures? We see this whole thing about self-policing. How does that change?
I couldn't hear exactly, but my understanding is you asked me about the procedures in terms of a post-shooting situation.
Sure. Yeah, the fact that the officer washed the blood off his hands, and
right.
Can we trust the Ferguson police to do something differently moving forward?
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, there's no excuse for that. That never should have happened. Inexcusable. That, the fact that Officer Wilson drove himself back to the headquarters, the fact that he booked his own gun into evidence. There was nobody there to supervise him. This was just a mess. I mean, I teach this stuff around the country, and this should be common procedure all around the country. And my hope is that smaller agencies start getting into the 21st century on this vital issue of ensuring the integrity of a shooting investigation.
Brian, do you agree with David here? After Ferguson, do you think that these changes, the police changes, happen at the local level? Do they happen at the national level? Do we need laws or new police procedures even to maybe uniformly change some of this stuff?
Well, that's a good question. I think in Missouri, let's focus on Missouri. It is an officer-friendly state. So I think in a state like Missouri, you need to change the laws. Because you heard Officer Wilson in his interview. His comment was, "Hey, I followed the law. I did my job." So I think what we have to do is change the law, because in Missouri, if he's trying to make an arrest, if he thinks, for example, Mike Brown here is going to commit a felony or has committed a felony, he can actually deploy deadly force. The federal standard is different. The officer has to be in imminent fear of grave bodily harm. So that's why Wilson was saying, "Hey, I did my job, I followed the law." So we got to start with the law, number one. Then I think number two, you really have to work on the mentality of police officers. Give you a quick example. Calling for backup in most officer-involved shootings would eliminate a death. I've been in a lot of cases, Suzanne, where tragically, within seconds of a suspect being shot and killed, other police officers arrived. Time often is on the side of a police officer, so we need to teach temperament as well.
Okay, David, Brian, I want you guys to stay with me, because up next, we're asking this question. Is Tamir Rice the latest martyr for the cause of changing how police keep us safe? Will this 12-year-old's death cause another anguished city to rise up and demand change? I want to warn you that our next story contains graphic images not appropriate for children. You might even want to take them out of the room. At this hour, friends and family, they're gathered for the final public viewing of 12-year-old Tamir Rice. A rookie Cleveland police officer fatally shot Rice as he clutched a toy gun. This happened 8 days ago, and his funeral is set for Wednesday. Well, already, outraged protesters, they've been holding up images of Rice and Michael Brown. Which brings us to question number 4. Is Cleveland the next Ferguson? George Howell has more on the Cleveland boys' final moments.
This video was recorded on a security camera in a Cleveland park, and it shows Tamir Rice moving in and out of view. Keep in mind, these are the last few moments of this 12-year-old's life, a video his family wants you to see. First, we see Rice pacing the sidewalk, brandishing what looks to be a weapon, at one point even taking a two-handed shooting stance. All the while, police say he was being watched.
The gentleman sitting in the gazebo is the gentleman that called into our dispatch center.
Here's that initial call to 911.
I'm sitting in the park at West Boulevard by the West Boulevard Rapid Transit Station. And there was a guy in there with a pistol. It's probably fake, but he's like pointing it at everybody.
In fact, the caller points out twice the gun is probably fake.
The guy keeps pulling it out. It's probably fake, but you know what? It's scaring the out of me.
Here's the clip that shows why the man called 911. The object that looks like a handgun, we now know, is really a toy pellet gun. And Rice seems to point it at this person, whose identity is blurred. Police say he's also seen here reaching for his cell phone, then having a conversation. Minutes later, Rice moves to the gazebo, where he's now alone. This just minutes before police arrive, and now we know exactly what the dispatcher told the responding officers before they arrived. Notice how she never relays the information that it may be a fake gun.
Everybody's tied up on priorities. There's supposed to be a guy sitting on the swings pointing a gun at people.
A few seconds later, she describes Rice, but again, fails to pass along the words the 911 caller used about the gun probably being fake.
In the park by the youth center, there's a black male sitting on the swings. He's wearing a camouflage hat, a gray jacket with black sleeves. So he keeps pulling a gun out of his pants and pointing it at people.
What happens next happens very quickly. Officer Frank Garmack driving and Officer Timothy Lohman in the passenger seat.
The officers ordered him to show his hands and to drop the weapon, and the young man pulled the weapon out, and that's when the officer fired.
In the dispatcher's audio, you can hear the officer's grim call for help.
Radio, shots fired, male down, black male, maybe 20, black revolver, black handgun, I'm sending EMS this way.
Even as they call for help, the officers still not understanding that they'd shot a 12-year-old boy carrying a toy gun.
This is not an effort to exonerate. It's not an effort to show the public that anybody did anything wrong. This is an obvious tragic event where a young member of our community lost their life. We've got two officers that were out there protecting the public that just had to, do something that nobody wants to do.
George Howell, CNN, Atlanta.
I want to bring back my panel to discuss question number 4. Is Cleveland the next Ferguson? Well, former police officer David Klinger, I want to start off with you first, because you look at that and it's been reported it was 2 seconds, right, before that shot was fired by Cleveland police, jumping out of the patrol car and starts immediately firing. Was there some other way, another option in that situation that those officers were in, so that this wouldn't have ended in this fatal shooting?
In that situation, absolutely not, because the officer's confronted with someone pulling a gun. The issue is that the police vehicle, never should have been there. And we have a problem in American policing, and we need to address it, and that is that in many places, officers get too close to people too fast. And if you read the transcript of the Darren Wilson testimony, and then you piece everything together with other testimony, that's really where I think the situation went sideways here in Missouri, is Darren Wilson got too close too soon. And we could have a long discussion about this, but what it boils down to is this was a tactical failure on the driver officer. I do not understand why he put the other officer and himself so close. You cannot fault this young rookie who is presented with an individual disobeying a command to show hands, instead reaches for a gun. And in that split second, he did the right thing. The problem is that vehicle never should have been so close, and therefore the officer never should have been so close. They should have found a position of cover at some distance, got out, addressed with verbal commands, and hopefully then the young gentleman wouldn't have gone for the gun. This is a tragedy for everybody, including the officer that took this kid's life.
And just to be clear, do you think that the distance that was created that you're talking about would have allowed them to recognize that it was perhaps a toy gun?
I can't guarantee it, but I guarantee you one thing, it wouldn't have gone down like that. And I was on the street for only about 3 years, but was involved in numerous situations where individuals had guns. And I was fortunately trained by some very savvy veteran officers who drove it into my skull. You always want to create distance. You never want to get up close unless you absolutely have to. Unless there's an immediate public threat, officers need to stay back behind cover and then use verbal tactics to try to get people to comply. That doesn't mean they always will. I've had people, when I was on the street, I was behind cover, people would still go for guns. You never know, but it does buy you time.
All right, I want to get to you, Brian, here. You're an attorney as well. Critics have said that the Ferguson victim, Michael Brown, that because there was before at the convenience store where the robbery and that there were the questions about what had occurred ahead of the killing, that Michael Brown in some ways was flawed to become this national symbol. Do you think that this is a moment, an example, a model in Cleveland's Tamir Rice that people will listen and pay attention? Because by all accounts, it looks like this was just, reportedly an innocent boy.
Well, Suzanne, I agree with one thing David said and disagree with the other. I agree that the police officer in the Tamir Rice situation should not have driven up right next to Tamir Rice. That's the first thing. But secondly, I disagree with the police practices used with Tamir Rice. And they mirror, in many respects, what happened with Mike Brown in Ferguson. And that's what we talked about in the earlier segment, which is diffuse the situation, not escalate the situation. The temperament of police officers that come into a situation, they're aggressive instead of de-escalate. What they should have done here, let me finish. What they should have done here is they should have called for immediate backup and contained the perimeter of where this young man was, Suzanne, and then said the following: I am with this Cleveland Police Department, drop your gun, and then have a dialogue with this young man before you shoot. And secondly, all police officers have access to magnifying glasses on their rifles. They could have easily looked and seen that this is not a gun. But again, time is on the side of officers, and they shouldn't escalate.
Brian, did you want to respond to that?
I've never heard of a magnifying glass, sir. You and I disagree completely. We agree that they should have been back. My point, sir, is when you are 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 feet away from someone who is pulling a gun, you cannot wait. And for you to criticize this young officer for pulling the trigger is wrong. You and I agree they shouldn't have been that close. Yeah. That's my point. That's where you and I agree. Don't criticize the young officer who's going to spend the rest of his life in pain about taking the life of a young child that he now knows he didn't need to shoot. That's my point.
Yeah, he did make a grave mistake, and it gets back to Suzanne's point, which is training,
sir. He was
tolerance,
a rookie.
Temperament. You come into a situation like that, he's a rookie. That's exactly right. He should have pulled up about 30 feet away, called backup, contained the situation, taken a position of cover. You never jump out of a police car and look at somebody in the face who's got a gun. You stay behind your police car.
Sir. He was not driving, sir. There was a senior officer driving.
David, if you can hear me here, I want to ask both of you this question here, because there are differences in these two cases. But do you think this is a stronger case to take to the country, to people who are fighting the protesters and saying, look, there's an injustice that has been done here regarding this young boy, this 12-year-old boy?
The police made a mistake by getting close. I agree with your other guest. They should have stayed back. They should have started a dialogue. That is what I said. The problem is training here. The problem is an officer put his partner too close to an individual with a gun. It's not the rookie's fault for shooting when someone pulls a gun when he's that close. It's the department for not training superior officers or training officers in sound tactics. And that was my point from the beginning. If we look around the country, unfortunately, we need to do a better job of training our officers so they do not rush into situations unless there is an immediate public threat afoot. And unless there's that immediate public threat afoot, the officers need to stay back. I agree on that point, but don't criticize the rookie.
Last word for you, Brian, real quick.
No. Yeah, Ferguson and Tamir Rice in Cleveland validate the fact that police officers need to be a little more calm when they approach a situation, call for backup, time's on their side, have a dialogue, and do not escalate the situation.
All right, Brian, David, thank you so much. We've got to leave it there. I'm sorry we don't have more time, but we will talk to you again. It's it's a very controversial and heated topic, and of course, people just looking for answers and solutions to move forward here.